Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Science, a Wednesday web chat. I'm your host, as per usual, Madeline from the Outreach and Engagement Department at FAU Harbor Branch. Today's chat is going to feature Dr. Andia Chaves Fonnegra. Andia has been at FAU Harbor Branch since September 2018, and she actually has a dual appointment here. She works both on our campus and at the Harriet L. Wilkes Honors College in Jupiter, Florida. She does research and she teaches. For her research, she focuses on the interactions among organisms and their surrounding environments with a focus on sponges, algae, and corals. And she also does work that's really important for helping to improve management of marine ecosystems and help us understand the impacts of human-caused activities like pollution and climate change. So she's doing a lot of really cool work here at Harbor Branch. I'm just gonna give our usual reminder for anyone who's new to these chats that I'm gonna ask her some questions and chat with her, but we also definitely wanna hear from our audience and hear what questions you guys have for Andia. So if you're on Zoom, you can go ahead and use the Q&A function. It's at the bottom center of the screen. Ask your questions there. Or if you're on Facebook, then you can comment your questions and we will get to those as well. So without further ado, we'll get Andia joined in here and you guys can meet her. So we'll get her camera on in just a second. And there she is, the special guest for today. Thanks so much for joining us, Andia.
Hey, Madeline. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon.
So I guess the first thing that I'm curious about are some of the things that might not be on your resume, a few facts about you that you think are interesting.
Well, originally from Bogota, Colombia. I grew up in South America in the Andes Mountains. My house was actually outside of the city, so I grew up on the countryside, just running in the forest and playing in a river close by with my cousins and my brother.
Sounds idyllic.
Yeah, that is the river.
Okay.
And yeah, and also other two details. I love sports. I actually played basketball and soccer in my high school and in college. And you have there the picture of my my school. It was all elementary, middle school, and high school in Bogota City. Had a beautiful soccer field that to this day I still remember. And there are two facts. And a third fact is that before I applied to be a marine biology to the undergraduate program, I applied to the Navy in Colombia some years ago. And I wanted to study physical oceanography and work for the Navy. But at that time, the Navy was something new for women. So it was the first year that women were accepted, and they only let women to study maritime administration. So when I realized that I wouldn't be able to do physical oceanography, I decided to leave that program. And so then I registered for marine biology.
It seems to have worked out okay for you that you didn't join the Navy.
I agree. It's, you know, sometimes your path is not a straight line. It's kind of convoluted. And I think of my path in that way. Sometimes there are other things waiting for you. And then you make your choices, your decisions, and there will be something else that you can do to pursue your dreams.
When you were thinking about joining the Navy, was that after high school or after college?
After high school. So it was just immediately after high school. I was trying to find, well, I was in between arts and marine biology. That was the tough decision. I love both. And then I was looking for marine biology programs, like undergrad programs. And the only marine biology program in Bogota City was at Tadeo Lozano University. And as an undergraduate. undergraduate program, was the only one in the country. And the other program that was related was with the Navy, which was the physical oceanography. So I ended up joining the program in marine biology.
Okay. Probably was a little bit more in line with what you wanted based on the fact that you would have been basically, it sounds like sort of a secretary position in the Navy.
Yeah, it was more, I think, because there were only like 10 women and like 300 males, they didn't want to mix them into the program. So the females were designated to work in administrative jobs. When you start as a cadet, you have to start as. So I was like, no, I really want to be in the boat. I really want to be doing the science and the research. So then is when I decided, no, I'm going to be a marine biologist.
How old were you when you realized that you wanted to do more of that like researchy on the boat, explore the environment work?
So I was always very curious about nature, and I decided I want to be a marine biologist when I was between age 13 and 15. So when I was 13 years old, I had the opportunity to go with my family to the Rosario Islands in Colombia, on the Caribbean coast in front of Cartagena, the city of Cartagena. And while I was there, I basically went into, I just had the opportunity to snorkel for the first time. So I got the fins and a mask, and it kind of fit me. And then I just jumped in the water and started seeing what was on the bottom of the ocean. And there were many colorful things, like abstract shapes. And there were plants, I didn't know what they were. So I asked all the adults that were around me, and nobody could actually tell me what they were. It was like, oh, no, we don't know. Everybody knew the fish. Everybody knew about fishing and what kind of fish we get out of the water, but nobody knew about what was attached to the bottom. And for me, it was like finding a garden underwater. So I was very curious. And then for my 50th birthday, usually you have the quinceañera party, the 15 years old party. So my mom asked me, what do you want for your quinces, for your 15th birthday? And I said, I want to go to the Macarena River, to the Caño Cristales River in La Macarena, which is a ridge, a small mountain ridge on the flatlands of Colombia at the borderline with the Amazon jungle. So I've seen this in TV. There was like an ecotourism group at that time, probably the only one. It was called Paz Verde, like Greenpeace. And I decided I wanted to go. And I was like, my mom was like, okay. And it was a week and I was a minor and I was very young, but probably was the best trip of my life. And we got into Caño Cristales and you saw there some of the pictures. It was this plant, it's an aquatic plant that changed color over a period of time and gives the river that red color, and it changed from green to red to fuchsia, like really amazing. And I was swimming there, and one of the directors of the program had an underwater camera. It was the first time I had an underwater camera with me, and I just went into the, we just swam through the algae, and I was like, I want to be a marine biologist. This is absolutely cool.
That's amazing. That is going on my bucket list. Honestly,
I want to come back. I want to return. I haven't been there since then. It's an amazing place. Like you're in the middle of the jungle with a river that is red, and it's fantastic. It's a beautiful place.
You definitely made the right call picking that for your quince.
Yeah, no, it was totally, I was I was not a typical teenager. I just wanted to explore. Yeah.
For my bat mitzvah, my parents were like, you can have a party or we can go on a vacation anywhere in the world. I was like, let's go to Italy. Yeah. Definitely adventures and exploration is part of the blood of a scientist. So.
Yeah, it was amazing. And yeah, you just walk through the jungle. To get there, it was a whole trip. You just have to, it was like a road trip, and then you have to take a little plane, land in the middle of nowhere, then take a canoe, like with a tiny motor, 1 or 2 hours through the river, and then walk like for 4 hours through the jungle to get there. It's just a very, very amazing place, an amazing adventure.
Worth all of the trip, for sure.
Totally.
So that was your inspiration, and then you
Yeah,
pursued science?
I just love it. It was curiosity. Since I was little, when I grew up in the mountains, but I went to the ocean when I was 5 years old for the first time, you know, and I think the ocean amazed me. It was the dimensions, and it was how many things were there. And I always thought it was like a you know, perfect place to be. And so I decided marine biology was my path.
Awesome. So from undergrad doing that marine science program to working at Harbor Branch, what was sort of your pathway there and what drew you to Harbor Branch?
Well, when I was doing my master's, so I finished my undergrad and then I went to a master's program also in the Caribbean. It was a program between the National University and the Marine and Coastal Institute. And while I was there, I was searching online like internships, and I saw the internship program offered by Harbor Branch, which is an international program. So I checked all the requirements, and then I went to my supervisor and asked him like, hey, could you give me a reference letter? And then he said, oh, I actually know a Shirley Pomponi. She's a sponge biologist. Why don't you write her and ask her if she will be interested? So she immediately answered me and said, well, why don't you apply? I think you will enjoy being here and you will be a good candidate. So I applied, I went through the process, and I ended up being at Harbor Branch in 2005 as a master's student. And I worked with Shirley Pomponi as my advisor, and that's the picture. And that was the picture actually when the last day after we gave the presentation, the seminar. So Shirley Pomponi was the CEO of Harbor Branch, and she and Susan Sennett, who is on the left side, well, I think it's your left side. Both of them were my advisors. And I work in the biomedical research, and I was doing some experiments putting coral cells and sponge cells together to evaluate if the sponge cells were able to kill the coral cells over time when they were in contact. I was interested in interactions and how organisms can compete for space, and how some animals, you know, they use chemical defenses, or they use enzymes, or they use other mechanisms to kill animals that are, you know, that are close by. And in that way, they kind of keep their space and keep growing. So that's how I arrived. And then almost 2 years ago, I joined Harbor Branch as a faculty. But in between, I always wanted to return to Harbor Branch, you know, and I tried to go as a PhD student, but there was not possibilities, there were not opportunities at the time. And then I contacted Shirley for any postdoc opportunities, and there was not opportunities. And when I saw the post, I saw it totally in online too, like somewhere searching. It was through the honors college, and but the research part was through Harbor Branch, and I decided to apply. And today, well, I teach at the honors college. It's a liberal arts college, which brings a lot of different fields, and it's a very interesting place to be. And I have my research lab at Harbor Branch. And today I collaborate with Shirley, which is something really amazing after 15 years. You know, like have a mentor when you are in your 20s, and then come back and be able to collaborate with her is just a joy for me.
Yeah, to now be her colleague and peer must be a sort of goal achieved, I guess.
In some way, you know, I never had that in mind. You know, when I left Harbor Branch as a summer intern, Shirley and Susan were some of the first female role models that I had. I had other mentors, and I had one other female in Colombia, but they were like the first kind of like total interaction into research with a female. And females that were also in a different level, like Shirley was the CEO, she was a scientist, and she was also working in administration. So after that, I had a lot of chats. I chat with her about different things, including career paths. And I left Harbor Branch and I decided I'm gonna go for the PhD. But I never, it never occurs to me that I will come back to be her colleague. I always thought I will come back to be her student. So it's interesting how life work out sometimes.
And then you're still doing sponge research. That was your internship way back when, and that's sort of where you are again today, right?
Yeah, in some way, of course, expanded. I love marine sponges. I've been always fascinated by sponges, especially the coral excavating sponges. And to this day, I'm still fascinated by them. I still want to learn more about it, which I thought at some point now, after I finish my PhD, I will not be interested anymore. But every day I'm more interested. And it is, it's something that was born at some point as curiosity, reading an invertebrate book, I think in my first invertebrate class. And I was reading about the sponges, and then I was like, wait a second, they look like plants. How is possible that they are animals? And how, I was reading a short paragraph at the end of the chapter that said that sponges can kill corals. And I'm like, oh wow, that's how they can do that. So I became really interested in that, and to this day I'm still interested.
So is the coolest animal that you've seen a sponge then?
So yes, sponges for me are still the coolest animals. I have two actually, and some of them in their pictures. So the excavating sponge I mostly work with is this orange sponge. Is Cleona deletrix is the species name. And what it does is that it's able to, the larvae of the sponge attach into the coral, and it's able to grow inside and kill the polyps of the coral and then take over the whole coral colony. And on the left side, the picture that you see there, it's a coral actually sending mesenterial filaments to attack the sponge. So it's on the surface, but under the surface, like on the skeleton, like on the back side, the sponge is sending the filaments inside and killing the coral. So it's a very interesting interaction. And then the other organism that I think I found it fascinating, and it was like a first encounter that I never expected, is this juvenile blanket octopus. I saw that octopus in the Great Barrier Reef while I was just finishing a dive, and I was looking for jellyfish. I always kind of go up the surface, like going up to the surface looking for different things. I like jellyfish, so I searched for them. And then I found this, and I didn't know what it was, and I was like, "What on earth are you? You are you're a jellyfish." And then suddenly, I keep trying to take these pictures, which are not the best ones, but I was just like moving, with the waves. And suddenly it just threw me black ink. And I was like, you are what are you? You are an octopus. I didn't know. So then I sent some pictures and contact some experts on blanket octopus, and then they confirmed me that it was probably a juvenile of a blanket octopus, which are very rare. They are usually collected with nets, but it's very rare to see it, just in the water. So.
I have never seen that type of octopus before. It is gorgeous.
It looks like a jellyfish, but then you can see the little tentacles, and then it's just like, wow, and the eye there, and you're like, oh my goodness.
Was that trip to Australia for work, or was it personal travel?
It was personal. I went to a conference in Australia, and on my way back, I decided, to take some vacations as I was already there. And I decided if I'm going to Australia, I have to pick just one place where I would go before returning to back to home. So I decided to take a short trip to Great Barrier Reef, and it was wonderful.
Have you gotten to do a lot of traveling for work, for conferences or anything?
Yes, so that's one of the things that come with with science, and is that you participate in conference, you share information, you meet with colleagues. So I've been in different places through the years, and one of them was Australia, Europe in some places, and back in Colombia, Brazil, and the United States mostly.
So would one of those places be maybe the coolest place you've been, or did you get to do some other experimental work in cool places?
So through my work, not necessarily through a specific conference, but through field work, I've been in a lot of amazing places. It's hard to pick, but if I would pick some of them, I will pick San Andres Island in Colombia, maybe because it was the first place as a young researcher that I dove in, and that it had a lot of corals. So it was like a beautiful garden. And I started my research in some way there between the reefs in Santa Marta, where our campus was located, and between San Andres Island. And I always loved that place, maybe because it was the first one. But I had the opportunity to go also to Malpelo Island. I did a volunteer work there. When I was starting my career, my research, I started as an ornithologist. That's something. So I started actually watching birds and counting birds. And then Malpelo Island has a big bird colony of the masked booby bird. And there were some of the colleagues that were doing research there, and I wanted to go. I was like, I want to go there. You know, Malpelo Island is an island like 500 kilometers from the mainland in Colombia on the west coast, which is the Pacific and the Pacific Ocean, and the island is just a rock north of the Galapagos Islands. And it's alone, just by itself. It's kind of it's its own sanctuary, and it's a beautiful place. So I wanted to go. I put my name on the list. One of my colleagues told me, "Oh, we have people sometimes going, volunteers, but I take first all the ornithologists, and you are not an ornithologist. You are kind of a mix. You are more a coral reef ecologist, and you are kind of watching birds." So I told him, "Put me last. It doesn't matter." And then the time came. He's like, "I had like 20, 30 people. It will be hard that you will get there." But then the time came. He went through the whole list, and he's like, "I cannot go to this research. I need somebody to go and count birds for me for a week. And will you be able to go?" I said, "Yes, sure." So I went. That's how I ended up in Malpelo, and I help and volunteer and count birds from 4 a.m. in the morning to 10 p.m. for 5 days. Every 2 hours, I was counting the same parcel, like the same area in the rock, and it was amazing. And then I had the opportunity to also dive, and it was like, it's an amazing place full of hammer sharks, and it's beautiful.
So you're a secret ornithologist too?
I would say that's how I started. I love birds. I consider myself now more like a bird watcher, like once in a while, but at some point, if there are opportunities to go back and do more research with birds, I will be totally happy to do it. It depends, but that was my beginning as an ornithologist. And it was in between a choice, but also it was because I didn't have the money initially to go into scuba diving. It was too expensive, the scuba diving. So I was like, I think I'm going just to go for what I can do without too much money, which was ornithology. It was just binoculars and you just walk. So that's how I started. And through ornithology, I ended up getting an internship, and with the internship, I pay my scuba diving, and then I moved into the coral reefs.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I'm going to ask you a couple more questions about your research, but a quick reminder for our audience. If you guys have any questions for Andia, please ask them. If you're on Zoom, use that Q&A function. If you're on Facebook, comment your questions and we'll get to those too. And then we have something a little special and different today. We're actually at the end of this broadcast going to be sharing a survey. So if you guys want to take a minute to give us a little bit of feedback about your programs, definitely our program, definitely check that out at the end of the broadcast. So ask your questions. Andia, getting into a little bit of your research projects, maybe do you have a favorite research project that you've gotten to work on? I know you've worked a bunch of different places throughout your career, but was there one that stands out?
Well, I have a couple, you know, of research projects. They are all different and they all bring like kind of a different experience too. But as a master's student, we work on a project that was related to finding the chemical compounds of the sponges that were probably affecting or killing corals. That was one project that I collaborate with a group of chemists, and it was really interesting because we ran different experiments and the chemists were extracting different fractions and compounds and I was testing them. So as a young researcher, it was an amazing experience. And we were able to identify one compound that was new to science and that had an effect, would call a allelopathic effect into the corals. So it was able to kill the corals. And then later during my PhD, I work on also excavating sponges, but different species. And the objective was to find if the excavating sponges were increasing as climate change was affecting corals. So the corals are bleaching and dying. So when corals bleach and die, other organisms might take advantage of this space. And in this case, I was interested in finding out if the sponge was taking over. And there were a couple of really cool findings there. We found that the sponge reproduction was asynchronous, so it kind of happens at different times during a long period of time. In the summer when the corals are actually dying, getting bleached and dying. So the sponge larvae can attach to corals that are deteriorating. Also, we found that we were able to test with some 15 years data sets that the increase of the sponges was real, and it will happen in some reefs where a lot of the corals have died. So it was an interesting study that also makes some genetics information and how the populations of the sponges were structured and what was the connectivity between them in Florida and in other areas in the Caribbean Sea. And that took me to different places and collaborations, and it was a team effort in a good way. But I do remember that two projects.
Awesome. So these chemicals that they're producing that they can use to kill corals are really, really strong, I guess.
So it's more how it might get delivered, how much, we don't know. Well, we had some idea of the concentrations, but it was more the delivering, maybe the mechanism. So some of the compounds can be delivered externally through the water, and other ones, maybe in this case of the sponges, could be delivered through, through the filaments that were inside of the coral skeleton that the sponge sent through the skeleton. So they are more protected inside. So probably it depends of that.
Awesome. Well, I think we're gonna get to some of these public questions now.
Okay.
Again, a reminder for our audience, we'd love to hear your questions. Use that Q&A button or just comment your questions on Facebook. So this first question is from an anonymous attendee, but is actually something I think is a really important thing to ask. What advice would you give a young girl who may want to go into science?
Okay. So I think that if you're passionate and curious about something, just keep your passion and keep your dream alive. Sometimes people tend to tell you, oh, marine biology will not take you anywhere. Like any other career, it might not take you anywhere, but it might take you where you want to be. So just keep, be patient, work hard, and be open-minded to any opportunities, and try to find mentors. I found that having a mentor, somebody that can guide you through the process, even if you're in high school or if you once you get to college, it's important. And it's something that can give you, it's like a step by step. So just focus on what you want to do, and try to find the path for it. It might not be a straight path, so at some points you will have to be really strong and you persevere through the difficulties and the circumstances. So if you really believe that's what you want to do, you will do it. It's more about keep on track with what you believe.
And if you can find a female mentor, that might even be better.
I think it's funny. I will tell you, most of my initial mentors were males, and I learned a lot from them. And I will say that at this point, I think at this point, it doesn't matter if it's a female or a male, but both, having a combination of both in your career, both males and females, it will enrich your vision. Sometimes when you only have male mentors, you might not see yourself at the same level as a female, and you might reconsider, like, okay, they are this level, do I gonna be at that level? And you may wonder. So having a female mentor also showing you how to do science and how to do things, it's important.
I full-heartedly agree, and we've got some pretty awesome women that you can definitely get in touch with if you have more questions or if you want guidance. I know I am always happy to talk to potential scientists, and I'm always happy to see a young girl interested in it too. So
yeah, definitely. So young girls, we have a lot of female scientists right now in the marine biologist field, actually.
all right, our next question is from Bima. She's asking, does the coral reef have a spawning season, and what kind of conditions get corals to spawn?
Okay, so yes, they have a spawning season. So they tend to spawn when the temperature is warm, especially here in Florida, that we have like fluctuation in temperatures, is when the temperature is warm. It seems to be, depends of the species. Some of them can go from June like to September, even some of them October, kind of, but it's through the summer. And they also tend to spawn during the full moon or after the full moon, certain days after the full moon, when the water is calm. So there are kind of, they spawn when the water is not in a lot of movement, and that guaranteed that the sperm and eggs will find each other and get fertilized. So that are the hypothesis of why the eggs and sperm, are released during that specific periods of time.
Next question that we've got here is from John. Does the sponge actually eat the coral tissue?
That's a great question. That's a question I always had in mind. It's a question I'm still trying to answer. I would love to answer. So the interactions between the sponge and the coral, we thought at some point that yes, probably if the sponge is there, it might not only just competing with the coral for the space. So the sponge gets into the coral, kind of kill it and take the space. So that was our initial hypothesis. But the tissue of the sponge gets totally in contact with the coral cells. And it kind of rounds the polyps, which is the tissue, the top part of the coral, gets totally around and in contact. So I had some hypotheses that probably the sponge might be eating it, but it hasn't been tested. So I'm still working to see if we find out. That will make of the sponge a carnivorous sponge. And there are other sponges, not the excavating ones, that are carnivorous. So, but their mechanisms of eating prey are totally different.
What would a carnivorous sponge do? I'm trying to imagine.
So if they imagine, you imagine like the carnivorous plants that they have like these little fingers on the top. Well, the sponges, carnivorous sponges, tend to have like some kind of finger or filaments, and what they do is that they trap plankton. So small, tiny invertebrates and larvae, and then they surround them with their fingers, and then they digest. It's like an enzymatic digestion of the tissue, and then the cells take the parts of the tissue of the invertebrate inside through phagocytosis. So it's kind of take it inside. It's pretty amazing to think, you know, it looks like a plant. So it's you can think of it like carnivorous plant in some way.
Are there like time-lapsed videos on YouTube that I can find of this happening?
Yes,
okay.
there are some. They were found and described initially by French researchers, and they found them in some caves in the Mediterranean Sea. And then they did some experiments, and they have some videos. Jean Vasselet is the researcher, and I can send you some of his videos.
Yeah, I will definitely want to check that out.
Yeah.
I want to see that sponge that can't move from its spot catch plankton and eat it. That's so cool. The ocean is amazing.
Yeah.
Our next question is from another anonymous attendee. Where's your favorite dive spot, and what's on your diving bucket list?
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I will say there is a place a couple of years ago I was diving that I thought was fantastic, which are the mesophotic reefs in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. It's something that you don't expect to find in the Caribbean. It's full of corals at 150 feet depth, and it's just like this kind of like how to say, like bunch of, like, imagine like a garden, and there is not, like, the garden never ends, and the corals are all flattened at that depth, and they look purple, and when you go to that depth, it's kind of the color change, and everything looks more like fuchsia. So when you get there, it's more like a totally different place, and I thought it was fantastic. I never expected, so it surprised me when I was there. So I would think that's a very cool place to dive, and one of the best ones I have dove. And the places that are in my bucket list, I want to go to the Coral Triangle in between the Pacific and the Indic Ocean. I'm hoping to go to Bali at some point also and dive there. That's one of the places I definitely want to dive. And then at some point, when I was younger, I always wanted to go to the Baikal Lake in Russia. And the reason was that there are these huge sponges, like green sponges, huge in that lake. So I was like, I want to see that huge green sponges. But at this point, I was like, I don't know if I really want to dive in that cold water.
Find a dry suit.
Yeah.
It might be worth it.
Yeah, maybe. We will see if it happens. I thought it was, it was very interesting.
Oh my gosh. I feel like if you're given that opportunity, you can't pass it up. You can stick it out and be cold for a few minutes.
Probably.
Actually, Shirley just commented, and she said it's very cold, but definitely worth it.
So, okay.
Great from your mentor's mouth.
I will follow her steps.
Our next question is from Christopher. He says that you have a wonderful spectrum of interests in your life. Are there any organisms you aren't particularly fond of?
Marine organisms or terrestrial? No, I'm kidding.
Whatever you want, wherever you want to go with
well,
that.
terrestrial, I don't really like snakes. I like to see them and in pictures and it's good, but I don't like to touch them and I will not be able to work with them. It's just like an instinct that when I get close to a snake, it just repels me so much. And it's not that I'm afraid, it's just this instinct of like, just don't touch it. And I mean, I've never been able to touch a snake. I tried 3 times, I've never been able to touch it. So snakes will not be on my list. And from the marine organisms, I don't know, I tend to like all of them overall. I prefer invertebrates, but I like fish and I'm very interested in the interaction of the benthos, which is the habitat that is at the bottom, and how the habitat it's changing and how that is affecting our resources. So fish and sea turtles and many other organisms that we eat, they live in this habitat. And if we destruct it, then we are gonna lose our sources. So it's kind of everything is connected, and that's why I think my research is important for the community, because it allowed us to understand the habitats, to protect them and to restore them. And my hope is that some point my research will allow that will allow to recover, you know, coral reefs or certain habitats, so future generations will be able to enjoy them too. And that's why, you know, everything is connected, and the fish are part of it. So I don't know, I will stick with the snakes. No.
I understand. I have a healthy respect for them. The next question is from Trisha. She's saying she's heard that you help provide science information to the Hispanic community. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I think since 2013, I joined a group. The name is Biogenic, and it's the meaning is that we are all Colombian genetic Colombian biologists that work on genetics, and it's a very interesting group. We are all biologists. Most of them are plant biologists, and I'm the only one marine bio. And what we do with this group is to communicate science for the community in Spanish. So we write small articles about different subjects. Right now we have a blog on coronavirus. So we decide to take, you know, like what's the coronavirus, and every month we publish an article, and we do our internal review, and we try to meet once a month, and we've been doing this since 2013. So one of the Colombian newspaper asked us if we wanted to put our blog in the newspaper, because they didn't have many science blogs. So we also write our blog for the Colombian newspaper El Tiempo, and it's published monthly. And we just do it because we believe it's important, because we grew up and there was not a lot of science news, and we try to digest the science for the community and put it in simple words so everybody can understand it. And that's what we want. We want to communicate science for better understanding and better decision making in general for the public.
That's wonderful. That's really important. I'm sure that not all of the science textbooks and information that becomes available gets translated into all of these different languages. So the work you're doing is great.
That's true. Like the most recent articles, once they get published in English, they don't get published in Spanish. So if you don't know English, or if you want to read, you know, certain articles, it's a little bit harder. So there is kind of a gap in between that, and in between what is the latest news in science versus what it's delivered there through newspapers or the news.
It's wonderful that you're helping to bridge that gap then. Well, we're about out of time for questions from the public, but Andia, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really wonderful and inspirational to talk to you.
Thank you, Madeline. It was really nice to chat with you, and I hope everybody enjoyed. And thank you so much for the questions from the public.
Yes, the public always provides so many fantastic questions for us. So thanks to you guys again. I'm not sure what just happened. Start my video. Hi, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened there, but another reminder for you guys that there's going to be a survey happening, so definitely please be a part of that. And then for next week's Behind the Science, our guest is going to be Dr. Laurent Cherubin. Laurent works in studying and understanding ocean dynamics, which is basically why the water moves the way that it does. And his work is trying to establish how different forces like gravity or wind or the moon phases affect how water moves, and then also how that impacts ocean environments and ecosystems. In addition to doing his ocean dynamics work, he's actually also the lead investigator on something called the Grouper Guard project that's happening here at Harbor Branch. It's a DARPA-funded project which is trying to study if Goliath grouper vocalizations could be used as sort of an alert system for national defense. So he's a really interesting guy. He'll be our guest next week, so definitely tune in on Wednesday, May 27th to hear more about him. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about Harbor Branch, you can definitely visit us online at www.fau.edu/HBOI, where you can read more about our research projects, and you can also check out all of our great virtual resources, including all of the previous episodes of Behind the Science. So I hope you guys enjoyed our chat with Andia today, and then definitely tune in again and have a wonderful evening. Bye.